cost-based decision, they're going to think that that's what the cost is. So it's not that you can't do other things, but if you do, please be open and transparent about it. And what we've encountered is a system where we have not been charging what it costs. We have deviated from a cost-based system because we really, really, really didn't want to raise water rates. I mean, if you read Facebook, you would see that there are comments from people who think that we are really happy to raise costs for folks. And we are really, really not. It makes my life more difficult, it makes y'all's lives more difficult. None of us wants to cause pain, suffering, heartache, increased costs. None of us wants that. And so there's a built-in disincentive to take it on when it's a thing. And I think we may not have taken it on, and it may have grown on us over time. So, what are the steps? First of all, we need to figure out the revenue requirement. How much money do we have to raise? Second of all, we need to figure out what that cost of service needs to be and how it's shared. And then finally, we design a rate that gets that done. So in the revenue requirement, we are just comparing revenues to costs. What does it cost to do things? How much money are we bringing in? And then are the rates that we have adequate to recover the costs? Spoiler alert, no. Part of understanding about the costs and understanding why that's important is because knowing what is a fixed cost and what is a variable cost is going to impact us later when we're talking about how to share those costs appropriately. For the purposes of utility billing, fixed costs are things that don't change depending on the amount of water that we bill. So they may change. They're not fixed in terms of it's a static number every month, but they don't change depending on cycles or depending on billing. So water loss due to leaks or hydrants or unmetered use or whatever, while it's a thing that we hope ultimately to have control over and hopefully control a lot, in the short term, it's a fixed cost. Because whether we bill a lot or a little, that cost is there and we have to deal with it. Other fixed costs are our water lines, our water towers, our people, our fleet, our equipment. All of those things are fixed costs. We've got to pay for all those things regardless of how much water we sell. The variable costs go up with each gallon of water sold. We pay retail for our water. For other folks, the water treatment plant and the operation of the water treatment plant is a fixed cost, not for us. For us, we are billed by the gallon for treated water from Aquila, so our fixed costs and other people's fixed costs are not the same. Our fixed costs our variable costs are higher because they account for all of that treatment cost. So the cost of service component takes all of that revenue requirement, the money that we need, and then allocates it to the various customer classes around in a way that is fair and equitable. So the share paid by residents, the share paid by businesses, the share paid by people with a ginormous water meter, and the share paid by people with little water meters. So we've got standard costs that are the same. So we talked about water loss. There are a ton of the costs that really, it doesn't matter what kind of customer you are, you have a share of all of that. And then there are costs that are specific to residences, and there are costs that are specific to multifamily. There's costs that are specific to non-residential uses and irrigation. By understanding how those costs need to be fairly shared, we keep one group of payers from subsidizing another group. We don't want little old ladies on the fixed income paying more than their fair share and businesses paying less. Ideally, we don't want anybody paying more than their fair share, and we don't want anybody paying less. So figuring this out is a lot. For example, most of our customers are residences, right? The Blues residences, but they're not the vast majority of our water usage. Because we've got businesses that are using hundreds of thousands of gallons. So the way that you would split off the total residential cost per resident is different than the way you would split up the total business cost per business. Okay. Now we get into rate design. The two components of rate design are rate level and rate structure. The rate level is, are we bringing in enough revenue to pay that revenue requirement per customer class? The structure is, how are we splitting things up? So let's say we talked about our fixed costs and our variable costs. When we talk about fixed costs, the majority of peer cities that we looked at have a base bill that does not include any water. Currently, our base bill, you get 2,000 gallons of water, we call that free. You say we're paying you for that 2,000 gallons of water, right? Most of the peer cities that we looked at, there is not an included amount. You've got a base bill that pays your portion of those fixed costs, and then whatever you use, you pay your variable costs that are associated with your customer class and all of that. So, base bill and then a volumetric rate is what they call it per 1,000 gallons. And I use this KGAL throughout because 1,000 gallons is the thing that is going to come back up. I am sorry, this is so small. My slides reformatted on me as I was getting ready. This just shows you, and it's bigger behind you. This shows you if you had a base bill as a residence, and you had a per 1,000 gallon rate for a low usage. That per 1,000 gallon rate tends to go up the more gallons you're using. Why is that? Because higher volume is more expensive to serve, and frankly, it is often elective. There is a sort of necessary amount that we all need, and then beyond that, you've got some choice over that. So in terms of that base bill, what you'll see is, and every utility is different, but your first 2,000 or 3,000 gallons is maybe $5 per thousand, and then up to maybe 8,000 gallons, maybe it's $6 per thousand, and then maybe beyond that, maybe it goes up to $7. For a small commercial meter, you might be looking at a similar base bill, but for some commercial, and this is different, right? All of the peer cities that we reviewed have slightly different structures. Something that a few cities do is the tiers of use are different for commercial. So like on a residence, most of us are using 3,000 gallons a month, 4,000 gallons a month. You've got our actual biggest group, our biggest single tier is around 1,000 gallons a month. So think about it, those folks are paying twice as much as people using 2,000 gallons because it's the same, and they are our lowest individual users. So think about 3,000 or 4,000 gallons per month. You don't need a lot of tiers, and you don't need those tiers to go up very high for residential usage. On the other hand, for commercial usage, you've got to go up into the 100,000 gallons. So if you use that same tier, up to 10,000 gallons, then everybody on the commercial end, they're up at 100,000 gallons a month, and they're paying per thousand what somebody's using that just uses 10,000 gallons a month. It's apples to oranges. So in this example, that a couple of other cities use, you have a different per gallon low, per gallon medium, per gallon high. Here we go from like 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100. You get big jumps for commercial where you don't have those big jumps for residential. I know the course is almost dead, but a couple of other things I want to hit on this slide. One of them is the meter size. So depending on the size of your meter, there's a different demand on our system required to serve that meter if you run it full throttle. So whether you turn it on or not, we've got to be able to supply a certain amount of pressure and a certain amount of volume to that meter. So the base bill, for the most part, depends on your meter size. And those meters go up, into the $3,000 a month for a base bill, 0 water, for a great big ginormous meter, because to have the ability to even serve it costs us money. So you see that commercial small meter compared to commercial large meter. Think insurance office versus IKO or Johnson. And then finally, irrigation. Irrigation is super expensive for a couple of reasons. Number one, it gets messed up a lot. It freezes, you run over a sprinkler head, water's running down the street. It's costly in terms of unintended use, but it's also costly in terms of demand. The more steady across the year somebody's demand is, the less expensive it is for us to serve them because they're paying the cost that we have to serve them with most of the time. If you use 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 a lot, we've got to have the ability to serve you up here all the time. We can't just shut that off. So you may only pay us this amount for 3 months in the summer, but we've got to have the ability to serve you at that amount 12 months of the year. So for that reason, irrigation is more expensive, and in a lot of places is called out as a higher use class. Finally, there are a lot of issues around multifamily, and the way that they're metered and the way that they're built, because multifamily units act like residences. They have customer service requirements like residences, they have risks associated with them like residences, but they may be billed at 1 year. And so some rate structures account for some kind of per unit charge as well as the meter charge. All right, looking at peer cities, looked at a lot of cities. Some of them are more comparable to us than others, and I really kind of, somebody asked on Facebook yesterday, what about cities around us? The cities around us don't really have a lot in common with us. They are either much bigger or they are much smaller. If they are much smaller, they don't have a lot of businesses and industry, which affects the way that rates can be structured and costs can be shared. Belle-Meade, for example, is close to us. They're a similar size, but in 1950, Belle-Meade had 800 people living in it. They don't have 100-year-old pipes like we do. They're not dealing with the same issues that we're dealing with. That said, so we took sort of a mixture of cities that are around us that people might think of as examples, and then I just straight up looked at other cities with a similar population to us, or maybe a little larger, because we kind of want to think about cities that may be doing it right, that may have been doing their studies and not just reapproving what they did last year, because C also SLED too, right? Some of those cities are Granbury, Mineral Wells, and Taylor. Those are cities that have similar population and they're old, right? Hopefully they're taking care of business, but they're old. They're dealing with the same problems that we're dealing with. Okay, so we have a wonderful volunteer gentleman who's here with us, who built us a very robust model that I have used to plug in the water rates of all of these other cities and compare them to our rates. And the reason that that matters is because our rates are going to be applied to our customers. It doesn't matter what it's bringing in another city, because it has to be the same number of residents, it has to be the same level of use, it has to be the same distribution of water meters in order for it to bring us the revenue that we're going to need. So to understand what its impact would be to us, we have to take their water rates and then charge them to our people's historical existing usage. So that is what this model has allowed us to do. Doing that, this is the level of revenue that we would get if we were using the other cities' water rates compared to our revenue level. And so you will see the red line is where we are. We are bringing in about the same, or our rates we bring in about the same as the rates of Belle-Meade, Cleburne, and West is higher than us, but not by a whole bunch. Considerably higher than us are Granbury, Taylor, Hubbard even quite a bit more, And mineral wells, and we'll talk about mineral wells in a minute. So here is a comparison of residential water bills using all of those water rates at 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, and 6,000 gallons per month. And I took a little line across. So just remember, look at Taylor and Granbury. All right, they're bringing in a lot more revenue than we are. 40% more, maybe higher for Granbury. Taylor right now is 43%. But if you look at Granbury, their residential rates are lower than ours. At no point do you get to a place at 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, or 6,000 gallons. At no point in there are our people paying more, less than Granbury's. Taylor's, they're paying more than we are, but not by much. It's pretty close. And obviously Mineral Wells is a lot more. Hubbard is considerably more. So comparing, looking at Granbury and Hubbard bringing in more revenue than we are, and look at the way that the rates stair-step up. So the red line is the amount that our rates go up by use. So I'm going to take you back to fixed costs versus variable costs. That's how much does your rate go up if you're using more water, right? The red line is how much our residential rates go up if you're using more water. The blue line is how much theirs do. You see, there's a big difference, and that is in our rate structure. That is in the way that we split up fixed costs versus variable costs. And whether we're recovering the cost for the increased usage. Similarly, let's look at Cleburne and West. They're bringing in about the same amount of revenue that we're bringing in. And West has a similar breakdown than we do. But Cleburne, they're bringing in the same amount of revenue. But look how much less their residential customers are paying. Because their base bill is lower and their incremental rate is higher. That is where I think we have some real opportunity. It's not just about if we need 40% more money, charging everybody 40% more. It's about figuring out what is really fair and what is the best way, and that's why I'm going through all of this, is because it needs to be done in a way that is fair and equitable across the board. I'm not going to get into all of the details about the different comparable cities. There are some interesting takeaways from each of those. The council, we have them in your packet with the PowerPoint. You'll need a microphone and a magnifying glass to read that. They're there. And we'll probably have more conversations. I can share all of this information. But it's kind of a lot, so I'm going to kind of skip through it. But I want to just say, if we just took, just as an example of changing the structure as well as the level of our rate design, if we just took Taylor's rates and applied them to us tomorrow, wham, we're charging what they're charging, we would increase our revenues by 43%. Okay? The share of revenue paid by residents would go from 51% to 43%. This is a slide that I took out. This is one of the 50, and I should have left it in, but it compares what percentage of the overall costs are borne by residents versus other types of ratepayers. And in Hillsborough, it's pretty high. Our residents are paying a higher share of cost. Why is that? Because by and large, each new 1,000 gallons is costing about $3.50 up to $4.50. And if you're using 100,000 gallons a month, you're paying very, very low rates. And if you're using 1,000 gallons per month, you are paying $42 per 1,000. 1,000 gallons, for your first 1,000 gallons, it is 100% of that base rate at $42.58. So you can see where a big disproportionate, I would argue, share of our costs are currently being borne. So to do an overall 43% increase, if we adopted Taylor's rates, the share of revenue paid by residents would go from 51% to 43%. The share paid by businesses would stay the same. The highest number of rate payers, the highest single number group, people using about 1,000 gallons, their bill would go up by less than $4 a month. Overall residential billing revenue would go up by 20%, the majority of that coming from the highest volume users, which arguably is choice use. People that are making choices about using that amount of water, and if it was a hardship, could adjust things that they are doing. Overall commercial billing would go up by 40%, with the greatest growth at the higher volumes, as we discussed. There would be big cost increases, like 100% increase, I think, for commercial sprinkler, 50% increase for residential sprinkler, to raise those irrigation rates for the reasons that I talked about, that it's more expensive to do it. Multifamily, we talked about having a unit cost, and fire suppression. So those would go up significantly. But to do the same revenue increase and just apply it across the board to all of our existing base, and just said everybody gets a 43% increase, that residential user using 1,000 gallons a month, their bill would go up by $18.31. Overall residential billing would increase from that 20% to the 43%. Commercial billing would go up more under this scenario than under the previous scenario. And then obviously multifamily irrigation and fire suppression would go up much less. This is why we have a problem. This is why I am not here to meet with you tonight with a suggestion. I am sharing with you the steps and parts of this process, and what I think we need to hear is, what about this would you see us do differently? Where do you think we need to get more information? Where do you think we need to ask more questions? The last thing that we want to do is, work feverishly behind a locked door and come out with a solution and ask you to just trust us that it's the best one. This is complicated. We're going to have to get to the finish line, and I really want to get to the finish line, hopefully in a council meeting or so. And what I'd like to do is send out some dummy bills with whatever we land on. They won't be effective for a while, but we need to notify people. If we were on the new rates, this is what the bill would have been. Because people need to begin to absorb it and understand it and think about it. The goal, if we need 7.8 million and we've got 3.2, we're in a real problem. And part of this is because budgeted numbers of revenue are not the same as actual numbers of revenue. We now have our audited actual numbers of revenue for 2020. Okay. Part of this is because the capital improvement project that Aquila Water Supply is engaging on, because they are in the business of providing excellent water, and they do regular capital stuff, and they've been putting it on for a while. Their cost estimate went up significantly, and it is going to impact the city of Hillsborough alone by $2 million a year. That call I got today. So I am open. Every month that we don't do something costs us $100,000. we are $100,000 more underwater. Somebody asked on Facebook, what are the citizens going to get from this increased money?
Water.
And the answer is water. Like seriously, the choice is either this or at some point you turn the tap and nothing comes out. I'm going to tell you 2 stories. Number 1, my first job out of college, my first big girl job, was working for the city of Marlin. I love Marlin. I love Marlin. Full of good people who deserve good things. Marlin went from being a very, very big, robust tourism mecca. People traveled from all over the country, all over the world. New York Giants used to do their spring training in Marlin, Texas. They had 3 hospitals when Waco had 1. They had this big infrastructure, and their population has dwindled and dwindled and dwindled and dwindled to the point that they're upside down. It's not because they're not good, smart people. It's because they can't lift it anymore by themselves. When I worked for the city of Marlin, one day, the line going from the plant to the town broke, and we didn't have the ability, the manpower, the equipment to fix it. For 3 days, when you turned the tap in Marlin, Texas, nothing came out. Ozarka or somebody delivered a big truck of gallons of water at H-E-B. That's another story. It's an old H-E-B. Don't ask me. We can't have one. They opened the back of the truck, and people mobbed them. And it was like you were watching the news, right? There are real consequences to us not getting this right. The other story I'm going to tell you is that as I was researching, I literally just stumbled on it. Cities are approximately our size, cities that I know are historic. Mineral Wells, the newspaper article says, City of Mineral Wells approves a 146% increase in water rates. The city manager had been the police chief, had been the city manager for a year or 2 or whatever. And the quote that I will probably never forget is he said, "We just kept kicking the can down the road, and folks, we've run out of road." We have not yet run out of road. But if they're smart, we'll stop kicking while we still got some room. So that is what I have for us tonight. I am really